Hey everyone, I never thought I'd be the guy writing something like this, but here I am. My name's Ryan, I'm 34, living in Austin, Texas, and I work as a graphic designer. Life's been pretty straightforward for me: steady job, great friends, and until recently, what I thought was a solid marriage. I met my wife, Hannah, back in college. We were both in the same intro to psychology class, and she sat right behind me, always tapping her pen on the desk. It was annoying at first, but then we started talking, and I was hooked. She had this spark: funny, smart, and always full of energy. We dated through college and tied the knot 3 years after graduating. For a while, things were great. We traveled, bought a little house in the suburbs, and even talked about starting a family. Hannah worked in event planning, which meant she was always juggling schedules and staying late for work, but I trusted her. I mean, why wouldn't I? We'd been through so much together, but over the past year, something started to feel off. She became distant, like her mind was always somewhere else. She started going out more, saying she needed girls' nights or that she was meeting clients late. And when she was home, she was glued to her phone, laughing at messages she never shared with me. I tried to ignore it at first, chalking it up to work stress, but the gut feeling wouldn't go away. Little did I know, that gut feeling was about to turn my world upside down. It all started unraveling one weekend when Hannah said she had to leave town for a work retreat. She'd done this before: quick trips to plan events or meet with clients in other cities, so I didn't question it much at first. But something about this trip felt different. She seemed overly excited, practically glowing as she packed her bags. It wasn't the usual stressed-out Hannah trying to remember if she packed her charger or if she had enough business cards. No, this was a different energy. She was almost giddy. The night before she left, I was sitting on the couch watching TV while she packed in the bedroom. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table next to me. Out of habit, I glanced at the screen. I wasn't snooping, just a quick glance like anyone would do. But what I saw made my stomach twist. A text from someone named Ethan flashed on the screen: "Can't wait to see you tomorrow." Just like old times. Ethan. That name wasn't unfamiliar. Ethan was her childhood friend, the guy she always mentioned when reminiscing about her teenage years. I'd met him once at a mutual friend's wedding, and he seemed harmless enough: friendly, laid back, maybe a little too comfortable around Hannah, but I didn't think much of it back then. I mean, they'd known each other since they were kids. What was there to worry about? But now, seeing that message, it felt like a punch to the gut. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was just innocent. But the way my gut clenched told me otherwise. That little voice in my head wouldn't shut up. So, while she was in the shower, I did something I'd never done in our entire relationship. I picked up her phone. Her phone wasn't even locked. That detail stuck with me later. It was like she was so confident I'd never suspect anything, she didn't even bother hiding it. I opened the message thread with Ethan, and what I found made my heart drop. It started off innocently enough, talking about old times, laughing over shared memories from high school. But as I scrolled further, the tone shifted. The messages became flirty, then downright intimate. There were jokes with double meanings, late-night messages about how much they missed each other, and then, photos. There were selfies of them together at bars, at what looked like his apartment, and even one of them at a beach. One she'd told me was from a work trip a few months back. But the worst part? The captions. "Wish you were here to hold me like last time," and "counting down the days until I can feel your arms around me again." I felt the blood drain from my face. She wasn't going on a work retreat. She was going to see him. I put the phone down, my hands shaking. How long had this been going on? Was it just emotional at first, or had they been seeing each other behind my back for years? The woman I thought I knew, the life I thought we had, it all felt like a lie. I sat there in silence for what felt like hours, my mind racing. Do I confront her now? Do I wait until she's back? Part of me wanted to storm into the bathroom and demand answers right then and there. But another part of me, the part still clinging to the hope that this wasn't real, just sat there, trying to figure out what the hell to do next. When she finally came out of the shower, she acted like everything was normal. She kissed me on the cheek, sat down next to me, and started talking about her work retreat plans, completely unaware that I knew. I don't know how I kept it together. Every word out of her mouth felt like a slap in the face, but I nodded along, pretending like everything was fine. The next morning, she left early. She gave me a quick kiss, told me she'd call when she got to the hotel, and walked out the door like she wasn't carrying on a full-blown affair with her childhood friend. As soon as the door closed, I sat on the couch, staring at the empty space where she'd just been. I felt numb. Betrayed. Angry. But more than anything, I felt lost. I didn't know what my next move was, but I knew one thing for sure: things were never going to be the same again. After Hannah left that morning, I sat there in the silence of our living room, feeling like the walls were closing in. It's weird how quickly your home stops feeling like home when you realize it's been filled with lies. I replayed everything in my head: every late-night text she laughed at, every work trip she took, every time she brushed off my concerns like I was being paranoid. How did I miss this? How did I let it get this far without seeing the truth? I didn't know what to do next. Part of me wanted to pack her stuff into garbage bags and leave it on the front lawn. Another part of me wanted to drive to wherever she was meeting Ethan and catch them in the act. But instead, I did something I never thought I'd have to do. I called my best friend, Jake. Jake and I have been friends since high school, and he's the kind of guy who doesn't sugarcoat things. When I told him what I found, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Dude," he finally said, his voice low. That's brutal. What are you gonna do?" "I don't know," I admitted. The truth was, I felt paralyzed. I wasn't ready to confront her over the phone, and I didn't want to send some angry text that she could just ignore or lie her way out of. I needed to see her face when I laid it all out. Jake, being the guy he is, offered to come over, but I told him I needed time to think. This was something I had to figure out on my own. I spent the rest of the day pacing the house, staring at her empty side of the closet, her toothbrush next to mine in the bathroom, the framed photos of us smiling on vacations where, for all I knew, she'd been texting him the whole time. By the time night rolled around, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to wait for her to come home and pretend like nothing happened. I was going to confront her as soon as she got back from her retreat. The next few days felt like torture. She called me every night, just like she promised. Her voice was cheerful, light too light. She'd tell me about her meetings, how exhausting the day had been, and how she wished I was there. The lies rolled off her tongue so easily, it made me sick. That I played along, keeping my voice steady, asking her how things were going, pretending like I was none the wiser. It was the hardest acting job of my life. But I needed to hear her lies, needed to let her dig herself deeper before I pulled the rug out from under her. When the day finally came for her to come home, I felt this mix of dread and anticipation. I didn't know how the confrontation would go, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to let her manipulate her way out of this. That I cleaned up the house, not because I cared, but because I needed something to keep my hands busy. Every time I thought about what I'd say, my heart would start racing. Would she confess? Would she try to gaslight me? Would she even care? Around 6 p.m., I heard her car pull into the driveway. My heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest. I sat on the couch, the weight of her betrayal heavy in the air. The front door opened, and there she was, smiling like she hadn't just spent the weekend with another man. "Hey, babe," she chirped, dropping her bags by the door. "You won't believe how crazy this weekend was." I didn't say a word. I just stared at her, letting the silence fill the room. She frowned, noticing my expression. "What's wrong?" I took a deep breath and finally spoke. "How was Ethan?" Her face went pale in an instant. The shift was immediate, like flipping a switch. For a second, I saw the truth flash across her face before she scrambled to cover it up. "Ethan," she stammered. "What are you talking about?" I didn't break eye contact. You know exactly what I'm talking about, Hannah. I saw the messages. I know you weren't on a work retreat. Her mouth opened and closed like she was trying to find the right words, but nothing came out. Then, finally, she crossed her arms and scoffed. You went through my phone. Seriously, Ryan? That was her defense. Not an apology, not even an excuse, just turning it back on me. I went through your phone because I knew something was off, I snapped. And guess what? I was right. She rolled her eyes, like I was the unreasonable one. It's not what you think. I laughed bitterly. Really? Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what I think. She sighed, like this whole thing was an inconvenience to her. Look, it just happened, okay? We've been friends forever, and things got a little complicated. A little complicated? I repeated, my voice rising. You cheated on me, Hannah. With your childhood friend. That's not a little complication. That's betrayal. She didn't even flinch. Well, maybe if you weren't so boring all the time, I wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere. That was it. That was the moment I realized the woman standing in front of me wasn't the person I married. The person I loved wouldn't have stabbed me in the back and then blamed me for it. I want you out, I said quietly but firmly. Pack your things and leave. We're done. For a moment, I thought she might argue, might try to salvage what was left. But instead, she just shrugged, grabbed her bags, and walked out the door without another word. As the door closed behind her, the weight of everything hit me all at once. The silence wasn't just quiet, it was suffocating. But beneath the heartbreak, there was a flicker of something else: relief. The lies were over. Now, it was just me and the truth. The door clicked shut behind her, and for the first time in days, the house was quiet. But it wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet, it was the kind that sat heavy on your chest, making it hard to breathe. I just stood there for a while, staring at the spot where Hannah had been, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. That I thought I'd feel better once I confronted her, like some weight would lift off my shoulders. But instead, I felt hollow. The anger that had fueled me leading up to the confrontation had burned out, leaving behind this heavy emptiness. The woman I'd built a life with, planned a future with, had just walked out like none of it mattered. I sat down on the couch, staring at the framed photos still hanging on the walls, pictures from our wedding, vacations, holidays. All those moments that used to mean something now felt like props in a play I didn't know I was starring in. Every smile, every inside joke, every "I love you" whispered late at night, it all felt fake now that I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face. Not the face of the woman I fell in love with, but the one who looked me in the eye and blamed me for her cheating. The audacity of it still made my blood boil. How could she twist it around like that? How could she act like I was the problem? The next morning was the hardest. Waking up and realizing it wasn't just a bad dream, it was my reality now. Her side of the bed was empty, her scent still lingering in the sheets, and for a moment, I thought about calling her, begging for an explanation, some kind of closure. But I stopped myself. What was the point? She'd shown me exactly who she was. I spent the next few days in a haze. I went to work, went through the motions, but everything felt off. My co-workers probably noticed, but no one said anything. I wasn't ready to talk about it anyway. How do you even begin to explain something like that? Hey, my wife cheated on me with her childhood friend, and then blamed me for being boring. Yeah, that wasn't a conversation I was ready to have, but eventually, I knew I had to tell someone. So I called Jake again. When I told him what happened, he let out a low whistle. Man, I can't believe she actually tried to flip it on you, he said. That's some next-level nonsense. Yeah, I muttered. It's like I didn't even know who she was. Jake was quiet for a moment, then said, "You coming over tonight? We'll grab some beers, shoot some pool. You don't need to sit in that house by yourself." Part of me wanted to say no, to just wallow in my misery a little longer. But I knew he was right. I needed to get out of that house, out of my own head. So I agreed. That night at Jake's place, we didn't talk about Hannah much. He knew I wasn't ready to dive into all of it, and I appreciated that. Instead, we drank, played pool, and cracked jokes like we were back in college. For the first time in days, I felt a little bit like myself again, but when I got home later that night, the emptiness was still there, waiting for me. The house felt colder, quieter. I looked around at all the things we'd built together, the furniture we picked out, the photos from trips we took, the little notes she used to leave for me on the fridge. And it hit me all over again, she was gone. And everything I thought we had was gone with her, but beneath all the sadness, there was something else starting to grow, a spark. A spark of anger, of determination. She might have shattered the life we built, but she wasn't going to break me, not forever. The days after Hannah left felt like I was living in some kind of limbo. The house was the same, but everything in it felt foreign. Her toothbrush still sat in the bathroom cup, her favorite coffee mug was still in the cabinet, and her perfume lingered faintly in the bedroom. It was like her ghost was haunting the place, except she wasn't dead, she just chose to destroy our life and walk away. That I knew I couldn't keep living like that, surrounded by reminders of a life that wasn't real anymore. So, one Saturday morning, I decided to clear out everything that screamed Hannah. I started in the bedroom, yanking open drawers and pulling out her clothes, tossing them into trash bags like they were contaminated. Every sweater, every pair of jeans, every little note she'd left in my drawers felt like a punch to the gut, but I powered through. I wasn't about to let her memory linger longer than necessary. Then I moved to the bathroom, makeup, hair products, all the little things she cluttered the counter with. Gone. By the time I got to the living room, I was on autopilot, ripping down photos, clearing shelves. But when I found our wedding album tucked away in the bottom of a drawer, I froze. I sat down on the floor, the album resting in my lap. For a moment, I considered opening it, just to see if I could understand when things started to change, when the woman in those photos became the person who betrayed me. But I didn't. What was the point? No amount of analyzing those smiles was going to give me the answers I wanted. Instead, I tossed it into one of the bags, zipped it up, and shoved it into the closet. I wasn't ready to throw it all away just yet, but I couldn't look at it either. Maybe one day, I'd be able to deal with it. But not today. Once the house was cleared, I sat back on the couch, exhausted but oddly relieved. It felt like I could finally breathe again, like the walls weren't closing in anymore. But the emptiness crept in just as quickly. It's strange how quiet a house can be when you're the only one in it. That I needed a distraction. So I did what any guy in my situation would probably do. I called Jake. Dude, he answered on the first ring, please tell me you're not still sulking around that house. I sighed. I just cleared all her stuff out. House feels like a morgue now. Well, that's progress, he said, his voice brightening. You need to get out. Let's hit the bar tonight. I hesitated. The idea of being around people, pretending like everything was fine, felt exhausting. But sitting at home wasn't doing me any favors either. Yeah, I finally said. Let's do it. That night, we hit up our usual dive bar, the kind of place with sticky floors, a jukebox that played the same 5 songs on repeat, and bartenders who knew your drink order before you even sat down. It was familiar, comfortable, exactly what I needed. Jake wasted no time introducing me to some friends of his I hadn't met before, guys from work, some people he knew from the gym. We drank, played pool, and for a few hours, I almost forgot about Hannah. It felt good to laugh, to feel like myself again, even if it was just for a little while. But then, as the night wore on and the buzz from the beers settled in, I found myself staring into my drink, my mind drifting back to her. I wondered if she was with Ethan right now, if they were laughing about me, about how easy it was to sneak around. The thought made my stomach turn. Jake noticed the shift in my mood. Hey, he said, nudging me with his elbow. You're thinking about her, aren't you? I didn't deny it. Yeah, I admitted. I don't get it. How do you throw away 8 years like it's nothing? Jake leaned back in his chair, his expression serious. Because some people don't value what they have until it's gone. And sometimes, not even then. But you? You're better off without someone like that. I nodded, appreciating his words even if they didn't erase the ache in my chest. As the night wound down, I realized something. I wasn't going to get over Hannah overnight. There was no magical fix, no instant closure. But sitting there, surrounded by people who cared about me, I knew I wasn't going to let her define me either. When I got home that night, the house didn't feel as suffocating. It still felt empty, sure, but it didn't feel like it was winning anymore. I climbed into bed, knowing the road ahead was still going to be rough, but for the first time since she walked out, I felt a flicker of hope that I was going to get through this. One day at a time, the days started blending together after that night at the bar. It's funny how quickly a routine forms when you're just trying to survive. Wake up, go to work, come home, stare at the walls, maybe meet up with Jake if I was feeling up to it. Rinse and repeat. But even with that routine, the quiet moments always seemed to catch me off guard. Mornings were the worst. I used to wake up to Hannah's side of the bed warm, her hair spilling across the pillow, her soft breathing the first sound I'd hear. Now, it was just me and the cold emptiness of a bed that felt way too big. And it wasn't just the bed. It was everything, the way I'd instinctively glance at my phone expecting a good morning text, or how I'd make coffee for 2 before realizing there was no one else to drink it, but somewhere in that monotony, I started to feel something shift. It wasn't a sudden, aha moment or a dramatic realization. It was more like, little things. Tiny wins. The first time I woke up and didn't immediately think about her. The first time I really laughed without feeling guilty about it. The first time I walked past a photo of us and didn't feel like the air had been knocked out of my lungs, and then, something unexpected happened. It was a Thursday, and I was heading home from work when I decided to stop by the grocery store. I wasn't in the mood for takeout again, and I figured cooking might be a good distraction. As I stood in the pasta aisle, debating between penne and spaghetti like it was a life-or-death decision, I heard someone say my name, Ryan. I turned around and there she was, Emily. We went to college together, shared a couple of classes, and had even been in the same friend group for a while. We hadn't seen each other in years, but she looked exactly the same: bright eyes, easy smile, and this energy that just drew people in. Emily, I said, surprised. Wow, it's been, what, 5 years? 6, actually, she laughed, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. How've you been? It was such a simple question, but it hit harder than I expected. How had I been? The honest answer would have been, terrible. My wife cheated on me with her childhood friend, and I'm still trying to figure out how to breathe without feeling like my chest is caving in. But I wasn't about to dump that on someone in the middle of the grocery store. I've been good, I lied, offering a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. Busy with work, you know how it is. She nodded, but there was something in her eyes that said she wasn't buying it. She always had this way of seeing through people, even back in college. Well, if you ever want to catch up properly, I'd love to grab a coffee sometime. I hesitated for a second, then pulled out my phone. Yeah, I'd like that. We exchanged numbers, and as I walked out of the store, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: curiosity. Not just about Emily, but about what it would be like to talk to someone who didn't know everything. Someone who didn't see me as the guy whose wife cheated on him. Just Ryan. That weekend, we met for coffee at this little place downtown. It was supposed to be casual, just 2 old friends catching up. But as we talked, I realized how easy it was to be around her. We didn't talk about anything heavy at first, just work, mutual friends, funny stories from college. But somewhere between our second and third cups of coffee, the conversation shifted. So, she said, stirring her drink, how are you really? I could have deflected, changed the subject, but there was something about her that made me feel like I didn't have to pretend. So I told her the truth. About Hannah, about Ethan, about the mess my life had become. She listened without interrupting, her expression soft and understanding. When I finished, she didn't say, "I'm sorry," or, "That's awful." She just nodded and said, "That must have been really hard." And somehow, that was exactly what I needed to hear. That we stayed at that coffee shop for hours, talking about everything and nothing. And when we finally said goodbye, she hugged me, a simple, genuine hug that felt more comforting than anything I'd felt in months. As I drove home that night, I realized something. I wasn't over Hannah. Not completely. Maybe not even close. But for the first time since she walked out of my life, I wasn't drowning in the weight of it. I felt lighter, and maybe, just maybe, that was the first step toward moving on. After that night with Emily, something shifted inside me. It wasn't like I suddenly woke up cured of all the pain and betrayal, but the weight of it felt a little less suffocating. It was like I'd cracked a window in a room that had been sealed tight for months, and fresh air was finally starting to seep in. Emily and I kept in touch after that coffee date. At first, it was just casual texts, sharing random memes, complaining about work, or reminiscing about some ridiculous college memory. But over the next few weeks, those casual texts turned into late-night conversations. The kind where you lose track of time and suddenly realize it's 2 a.m., but you don't care because it feels good to just talk. That we started meeting up more often, grabbing dinner, going for walks around the city, even hitting up a trivia night at a bar downtown. It wasn't like we were dating, not officially, but there was an ease between us that felt different from anything I'd felt in a long time. She didn't look at me like I was broken, and I didn't feel like I had to pretend I wasn't still picking up the pieces of my life. One night, we were sitting on a park bench overlooking the lake, the city lights reflecting off the water. It was quiet, peaceful, the kind of silence that feels comfortable instead of heavy. Emily glanced over at me, her expression thoughtful. "You know," she said softly, "you're allowed to let go." I frowned. "Let go of what?" "Hannah," she replied, her voice gentle but firm. "The anger, the betrayal, all of it. You don't have to carry it with you forever." I stared out at the water, her words sinking in deeper than I expected. Letting go. It sounded so simple when she said it, but in reality, it felt impossible. How do you just let go of something that tore your life apart? How do you stop replaying every lie, every betrayal, like a movie stuck on repeat in your head? "I don't know if I can," I admitted. "It's like, every time I think I'm over it, something reminds me, and it all comes rushing back." Emily reached over, placing her hand on mine. Her touch was warm, grounding. "It's not about forgetting, Ryan. It's about not letting it define you." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I realized she wasn't just talking about Hannah. She was talking about herself, too. We were both carrying scars from our past, both learning how to move forward in our own ways. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about what she said. I'd been letting Hannah's betrayal control my life for months. Every decision, every emotion, every thought had been filtered through the lens of what she did to me. But Emily was right, I didn't have to let it define me anymore. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in a long time. It was time to take my life back. I started small, clearing out the last of Hannah's things that I'd stuffed into the closet, changing the photos on my phone and around the house, even rearranging the furniture just to make the space feel new. It wasn't just about removing her from my home, it was about reclaiming it as mine. That I also started focusing more on myself, hitting the gym regularly, diving into new projects at work, reconnecting with friends I'd lost touch with over the years. It felt good to have something to pour my energy into, something that wasn't tied to the past, and through it all, Emily was there. She became this steady presence in my life, someone who reminded me of who I was before all the chaos. We weren't rushing into anything romantic, but there was an unspoken connection between us that neither of us could ignore. One evening, as we were leaving a movie, she turned to me with a mischievous smile. "So, when are you going to take me on a real date?" I laughed, the sound feeling foreign but good. It had been so long since I'd thought about dating, let alone felt excited about it. But with Emily, it felt natural. How about Friday? I replied, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. She grinned. It's a date. As I drove home that night, I realized something important. I wasn't over Hannah. Maybe I never would be, not completely. But I was moving forward. I was living my life on my terms, not defined by what she did to me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about what the future might hold. Friday rolled around faster than I expected, and with it came a mix of excitement and nerves I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just any Friday, it was the Friday. My first real date since everything with Hannah had blown up. And while part of me was worried about how it would feel, another part of me was ready. Ready to see what life could be like without all the baggage weighing me down that I spent way too much time picking out what to wear, which felt ridiculous. It wasn't like Emily hadn't seen me in gym clothes or after a long day at work, but this felt different. This wasn't just two friends grabbing coffee or catching a movie, this was me stepping into something new that we decided on, a little Italian place downtown. Nothing fancy, but cozy, with dim lighting and the kind of atmosphere that made it easy to talk. When I walked in and saw her sitting there, all my nerves faded. She had that same easy smile, the one that always made me feel like everything was going to be okay. "Hey, you," she said, standing to give me a quick hug. "Hey," I replied, feeling the tension melt away. Dinner was perfect. We talked about everything, our favorite childhood memories, embarrassing college stories, even our weirdest fears. It wasn't forced or awkward, it just flowed. There were moments where we'd catch each other's eyes and just know we were both thinking the same thing. How did this feel so easy? But then, somewhere between the main course and dessert, the conversation took a more serious turn. "So," Emily said, her eyes soft but curious, "do you ever think about reaching out to Hannah? Just to, I don't know, get closure?" I sighed, swirling the last of my wine in the glass. I'd thought about it more times than I could count. But every time, I came back to the same conclusion. I used to, I admitted. I kept thinking maybe there was something left to say, something that would make it all make sense. But now? I don't think I need that anymore. She made her choice. I don't want to give her any more space in my life. Emily nodded, her gaze steady. "That's really brave, you know." I chuckled, shaking my head. "I don't know if it's brave or just stubborn. Maybe a little of both," she teased, and we both laughed. As we left the restaurant, the cool night air wrapped around us, and there was this unspoken question lingering between us: what now? We walked in silence for a bit, the city lights casting a warm glow on the streets. When we reached her car, she turned to me, her expression unreadable for a moment. "I'm really glad we did this," she said softly. "Me too," I replied, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just saying it to be polite. I meant it. There was a pause, that kind of pause where you know something's about to happen, but you're not sure if you should be the one to make the move. But then, she leaned in, and I met her halfway. The kiss was soft, tentative at first, but then it deepened, and it felt like I was finally waking up after months of just going through the motions. There was no guilt, no hesitation, just this moment, and it was everything I didn't know I needed. When we finally pulled apart, she smiled, her forehead resting against mine. "So, does this mean I get a second date?" I laughed, the sound feeling light and easy. "You've got yourself a deal." Driving home that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Not because I'd forgotten what happened with Hannah, but because I realized it didn't control me anymore. I was living my life, making new memories, finding happiness in places I never expected. Over the next few weeks, Emily and I grew closer. We spent more time together, going on spontaneous adventures, trying new things, and just enjoying each other's company. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it felt real. Honest. And that was more than enough. But as things with Emily blossomed, I started to notice something else. The anger I'd been holding onto toward Hannah. It was fading. Not because I forgave her, but because I realized she wasn't worth the space in my heart or my mind. One day, I found myself scrolling through my old photos, ones I hadn't dared look at since the breakup. I saw pictures of me and Hannah, of vacations and holidays, of moments that once felt so important. But instead of feeling that familiar sting, I felt nothing, and that's when I knew. I was finally freed. As weeks turned into months, life settled into a rhythm I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't the same life I had before Hannah, but it wasn't the wreckage she left behind either. It was something entirely new, something I was building from scratch with Emily by my side. Emily and I had grown closer in ways I never expected. It wasn't just about filling the void Hannah left, it was about finding something genuine, something that felt like it belonged in this new chapter of my life. We shared more than just laughs and late-night conversations. We shared dreams, fears, and a sense of understanding that came from both of us having been through our own versions of heartbreak. One Saturday morning, we were lounging on my couch, sunlight streaming through the windows, her head resting on my chest as we scrolled through old playlists on my phone. We stumbled across one I hadn't listened to in over a year, our playlist. The one Hannah and I had made together. I felt Emily shift slightly, sensing the change in my mood. But instead of the usual sting, there was just clarity. "You okay?" she asked softly, looking up at me. I nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. "Yeah. I actually am." And I meant it. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just pretending to be okay, I was okay. That afternoon, I found myself doing something I never thought I would. I wrote Hannah an email. Not because I wanted to reconnect or get answers, but because I needed to close that chapter properly. It was short and to the point. "Hannah, I hope you're doing well. I just wanted to let you know that I've moved on. I'm not angry anymore, and I'm not looking for explanations. I just wanted you to know that I'm happy, and I hope you find happiness too. Take care, Ryan." I stared at the screen for a moment before hitting send. And just like that, it felt like the final piece of the weight I'd been carrying slipped off my shoulders. I didn't need a response, I didn't even want one. The act of sending it was enough. As the seasons changed, so did I. The person I was when Hannah left felt like a stranger now. I wasn't defined by her betrayal anymore. I was defined by how I rose from it, how I learned to trust again, how I opened my heart to something better. Emily and I eventually moved in together. It wasn't a rushed decision, it felt natural, like the next step in a story we were writing together. Every day with her felt like a reminder that life doesn't end with heartbreak. Sometimes, it just begins in a new way. One evening, as we stood on our balcony watching the city lights flicker against the night sky, Emily turned to me and said, "Do you ever think about what happened with Hannah?" I thought about it for a moment, then shrugged. "Not really. It's like, yeah, it happened. But it's not my story anymore. It's just something that got me here." She smiled, leaning into me. "I'm glad it did. And so was I. Because in the end, the betrayal didn't break me. It built me. It forced me to confront parts of myself I'd ignored, to grow in ways I never thought possible. It taught me that life isn't about avoiding pain, it's about finding the strength to move through it and come out stronger on the other side. So, if you're reading this, stuck in the middle of your own heartbreak, wondering if you'll ever feel whole again, you will. It doesn't happen overnight. It's messy and painful and exhausting. But one day, you'll wake up, and the weight will feel lighter. The memories will sting less. And you'll realize that you're not just surviving, you're living, and sometimes, that's the best revenge of all.